Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I'm going to be looking at the 6th album from Deadmau5. Album title goes here. Alright, you know how I mentioned in my review of random album title that whenever given the option, I will always opt for the continuous mix? Only once have I regretted the decision to go for the continuous mix, and that one time was for this album. When I was returning to this album in preparation for my review, I was astonished to hear a mix so poorly done that it actively took away from my enjoyment of the album. The bad mixing started out subtle with the transition between the first two tracks, Superluminal and Channel 42, which didn't properly match up the beats while crossfading. Then it got more obvious with the transition from Professional Griefers to Maths, which not only didn't match up the beats but also started way too late, leaving the song's outro awkwardly hanging in the air. But I completely lost it on the transition between There Might Be Coffee and Take Care of the Proper Paperwork, which cut off the former song in mid-beat and didn't even bother to crossfade the songs at all. At this point, I was in such utter disbelief that such a sloppy mix even existed. And I certainly wouldn't have believed that it came from the same guy responsible for the excellent mixes of Random Album Title and 4x4=12. Well, it turns out, Joel himself wasn't responsible for said mix. In fact, the actual album didn't have an official continuous mix at all. Apparently, I had an unofficial mix put together by some random YouTuber who clearly didn't know what he or she was doing. I didn't bother to look who was responsible, as I don't want to embarrass whoever did it, but I just need to get that rant out of the way. If that mix had been the real thing, I'd have docked points for that. There would be no excuse for Joel to have done that himself. Though, maybe I wouldn't have docked that much, as this is actually a major step up from 4x4=12 in my eyes. The songs don't fit together at all as a full album, but I get the feeling that this was intentional, as Joel wanted to make an album that was put together in the same manner as Get Scraped.
My first kind of unofficial album was called Get Scraped. You know, a lot of people have told me, oh, you should do something like that again, and I think I'm working my way towards doing that again.
And he did succeed in that manner. Much like that album, the track order here is completely arbitrary, and you could pretty much put these tracks in any order and not make the album experience as a whole any better or worse. That being said, this is also probably his most solid album to date, from an individual song perspective. I mentioned that Get Scraped kinda lost me after about the halfway mark, but this album kept me interested more or less the entire time. Like with Get Scraped, the variety on this album is a definite high point, although it gets more random at the end than it does at the beginning. So going down song by song, the album starts out with Superluminal, which, I'm gonna be totally honest, is probably the weakest song on the album. The song tries to follow in the footsteps of songs like FML or Right This Second, with its kind of six-on-the-floor bouncy beat, but comes up short to both of them. It's not as intense or engaging as FML, and it's not as melodic or catchy as Right This Second, and honestly I feel like this album could have done better without it. It's not a bad song by any stretch, but it's just totally forgettable. But then the album really gets going with the next track, Channel 42, which probably should have been the album's real opener. In fact, it almost kind of is, with a much more engaging melody that immediately removes Superluminal from my memory, and an amazingly satisfying drop. It's kind of similar to Animal Rights in its structure, which shouldn't be much of a surprise given that both tracks were co-produced by Wolfgang Gartner. Anyway, then we move on to the Veldt. The Veldt? I'm gonna go with the Veldt, which is based off of a short story by Ray Bradbury. The song is a very catchy melody. I do kind of prefer the original version of this song to the 8-minute edit, as the original version had this weird African-inspired intro that was really cool, but oh well. By the way, songs that had alternate versions that were better than the final album cuts is a bit of a recurring theme on this album, as also seen on the next song, FN Pig. Pig. I always pronounce it FN Pig. Now this song had a mashup that Joel released on his SoundCloud ages ago with another song on this album, October, and the result was Get in the October Cart Pig. On one hand, I would have loved that version to have made this album instead, but this version certainly isn't bad either. The build-up, which hasn't changed, is very melodic and epic, but the drop is very dark and percussive. but it's still a very memorable and well fleshed out song either way. Next up we have the intense and rock-oriented Professional Griefers that features the screaming voice of Gerard Way from My Chemical Romance. This is one of the catchiest songs on here, pretty much tailor-made to be a single. Maths is a more straightforward and darker sounding song that wouldn't have sounded out of place on 4 times 4 equals 12. In fact, I think there's a computerized voice on this song saying 4 times 4 equals 12. Honestly, that album could have used a song like this one on it, as the melody is a lot catchier than most of the other songs on there, but better late than never. Speaking of catchy melodies, There Might Be Coffee comes next, and this is one of the most melodic songs on here. It starts out with this cool string section, and then grows into this super happy and sunny melody later on. Then there's Take Care of the Proper Paperwork, which wasn't one of my favorites back when I was listening to Joel all the time, but coming back to it now, it's actually one of my favorite songs on here. It starts out with this creepy ambience, then turns into this really dark, metallic, and robotic sounding song later on. It's not particularly melody driven, but it's pretty cool to listen to. If I do have one complaint about this song though, it's that it just seems to build up to nothing and then abruptly cuts off at the end, which is slightly disappointing. But fantastic build up anyway. While re-listening to this album, this was the one track I probably returned to the most. Anyway, next is Closer, which for a while re-listening to this album, this was going to be my pick for the least favorite, as it sounded way too similar to one of his earlier songs, Slip. And while that still stands, it's grown on me a bit. The intro slightly reminds me of Kraftwerk on songs like Space Lab, and the melody isn't exactly the same as Slip. Though the whole time, even now, I still want to go at the end of every 32 beats. Then there's October. I already mentioned that this song was mashed up with FN Pig to impressive results, though the song holds up surprisingly well on its own merits. The melody's really catchy, and I'm starting to think it sounds better here than it did on the mashup. But after this, the album starts getting weird and more disjointed, like the beginning of Get Scraped. Sleepless is difficult to describe, but I absolutely love it. It's driven by an intense but slow drum beat and a subtle piano melody. This was far and away my favorite song off the album when I first heard it back in the day, and it confused the heck out of me when I saw it was among the least popular tracks on the album. Nowadays, though, I understand exactly why this song isn't as well loved as the others. And no, it's not because typical Deadmau5 fans hadn't gotten used to his non-trance sounding work. It's because, once again, Joel had an alternate version that was way better. Joel actually sang on that alternate version himself, and that actually gave the title more meaning. Sleepless was originally meant as a follow-up to his earlier song from Get Scraped, Careless. It would have made so much sense to have used the original vocal version, and I think would have explained away the disjointedness of the album better to his usual fans. But we got what we got, and the instrumental version is still excellent in its own right. The album could have just ended here, but it keeps going, and makes an out-of-left-field transition into Failbait, which is just a straight rap song featuring the talents of Cypress Hill, who I'm not particularly familiar with outside of a cameo appearance they made in a Simpsons episode. Either way, when I first heard of this album, this song was also far and away my least favorite. And in retrospect, I kind of want to slap the old me for saying that, because really the only reason I would have picked this as my least favorite is because it was a rap song. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this song, it was just that younger me hadn't yet figured out that he was capable of enjoying rap music. I mean, this song does stick out like a sore thumb, and it's not the best rap song I've ever heard, but it's not bad either. Finally, the album actually ends with Telemiscommunications, featuring Imogen Heap. I do wish the album had ended with Sleepless, but this would have been my second choice for an ending. This song is very simple and minimalistic, with just Joel on the piano, a few glitchy noises here and there, and Imogen Heap, singing a phone call? Ending on a subtle note. I like it. So, overall, I do have a lot of problems with this album, but after listening to this album enough times, I think I've come around on it, and I can mark it as some of Joel's best work. It's not as cohesive or easy to get into as Random Album Title, but the melodies are just as well done, if not better than on there. I went in expecting to tear this album a new one, as I hated that unofficial continuous mix. But no, even on the bad mix, I could still enjoy all these songs as individuals. It very much feels like a compilation and isn't well put together, but unlike For Lack of a Better Name, I at least felt a sense of purpose out of every song. Except maybe Superluminal, but I digress. Either way, this album gets my recommendation. One of the guys' best. Overall, I'm feeling a 7.7 out of 10. Favorite tracks: Channel 42, The Veldt, FN Pig, Professional Griefers, Maths, There Might Be Coffee, Take Care of the Proper Paperwork, October, Sleepless, and Telemiscommunications. And least favorite track, Superluminal. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, leave the comments and all the rest of it. Probably gonna be covering a couple of requests after this. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.